Now we have our connection set up, we can now look at making a table for the database. So now you can go back to your database, and again you can do this through an SQL command line, but it's easier to do it through the database itself. So now if we expand the database, and I'm using the example database here, and go into tables, you can see at the moment there isn't any tables here. However, if we right click tables and make a new table, it takes a second, here we go, and now you have the table design view. Here you can set up what goes into the columns themselves. So here we can connect, we can create a table. So let's start by, for this case I'm doing students, so students in a class. So let's start by having an ID. So this would be the student's ID, and let's have this as an integer. Oh, as an integer, there we go. And let's have it so it can't be null. Then let's have the student's name, and let's have their full name and their class ID. So let's have that as an integer, and the full name would be a varchar max. Okay, that seems good. We can set it with that. For this first table, at the moment, we don't need any more information. So we just have their ID, full name, and the class. I'm not going to add too much information to this. You can add as much as you want for this case, because it's just more to read, and it follows the exact same method. So let's save this now, and have this as students. Let's copy that. Okay. And now, if you refresh the tables, which can be done with Control-Shift-R to refresh the database, but we just want to refresh the tables, and now you can see students. So let's close this design view, and now start. You can edit now and add some information, so let's do that. So let's edit the top 200 rows, and we're going to want to maybe have a student's name, so Stanley. Oh, sorry, this is the ID. So let's do ID 0, and let's have Stanley. Or no, Fred. Hughes, and class ID of 1. So let's add that. Okay. And now we can close that. And now let's view the top. Select the top 1,000 rows. And now we have Fred Hughes with an ID of 0 and a class of 1. This won't be how you add information. This is just so we have some data in there in the first place. So now we have this table set up. We know it's in the example database with the table name of students, and that's going to be important. And in here we have the categories ID, full name, and class ID. So first we need to start by making a way to actually write data to this. So let's start with let's do this all in methods to make it nice and quick to then add more things and use this. That's why I'm doing this in a separate class. So let's start with a public, because we want to make it public to be able to access from another class. A public, and let's do a string. No, sorry, a void. Not doing a reader. So first we'll start with a writer, because we need some data in there. So let's do a public void and write data. And now let's first do it as a try-catch statement. So if something goes wrong, we don't get an error. And let's just have it do. We can always change this later if we do begin to get errors, but we won't want that happening in the real program for the user. Okay, so we have failed to write data, and now we first want to open a connection with that connection string to the database. So let's start with con, which is what I've got for connection up here. So you want to do con.open because you want to open a connection. And let's just straight away add con.close again, just so we don't forget, because that can cause problems otherwise. It's a bit like when you open a file and close it again. If you haven't closed it already, it can cause problems trying to open it again through another point in the same code. So now we're going to want to do com, which is command in this case, is how I've got it. So command.connection, and you're going to want to equal that to the com, which is the looks like the connection. Once you have this, you want to actually set the command text to put into the database. So if you go to the database and you go new query, you can see here you can write different things. So let's say we'd want to input data into this. We can do insert into, and then we'll want the database name, which is example. We will then want a dot, DBO, dot, and then the table name, which in this case is students, and there we go, it's pre there already. Now we will want the column names to insert data into. So let's have let's leave that for the moment. So that's how you'd write a connection string. That's how you'd start it for the inserting. So now we want to do that kind of thing here. So we'll want to have the same insert into. So let's do com dot, and now you want to define the connection string. So not the connection string, sorry, command text. So you want command text and then equal that to, and that will be a string. So in this case, I'm going to want to make it so I can input data into this. So let's have a string of database. And we also want to take in a string of what table name is. And we also want a string, for now it will just be a normal string of the column name. And we want a string of the value to actually input into that column. So you can have this as a 2D array later and have it so you can input multiple bits of data into multiple columns. So now we're going to want, actually no, let's have this as a string array now. Otherwise we'll have to change it later. So that will be an array of values you can input into it. So we'll want to do command text, and then let's add a $sign at the start so we can actually put values into it. And let's do the insert into, and that's the same as how we started the other line here. And we'll want the same method here. So we can do insert into, and then let's have database, so you can put what database to insert data into, because if you're not working with the same one, dot DBO dot, and then square brackets again, and now you're going to want to put the table name. So that's just table. Well, let's put table name. Oh no, don't need that. Just table. It's enclosed in this method anyway. Now here you're going to want the values to input data into. So let's start with actually converting that array into something that's usable in this case. Let's also put that there like that. So let's make something that's actually usable out of that array, because you can't just put all the data from the array. So let's say that data you input into it for the column names, let's say this won't stay here, but let's do a private string array and have it columns equals, and let's do ID and full name. Now it's important you get these all case sensitive and all correct in the names. So you'll see if I go back to here, we have a full name column and an ID column. So let's have those there. And let's also do class ID. So now you're going to want, so let's leave it like that for now. So that's how you would input data into it, but this would be from outside this class. So now we want to convert this into something that is a command for this, because you can't just put all the values in there. So for this, you're going to want to put first a bracket around the information. And then you can, there's multiple ways of doing this, but for an easy way of doing this, you want to put the brackets around the information, and then since there's spaces in between some of these column names, you're going to want square brackets around the actual columns themselves. And then you want commas between the columns. So let's, in a sense, we want, for now, let's just do it in its own little bit here, since we only have 3 bits here. Let's do first main brackets, and then we want square brackets, and then we can put column name to the 0. And then you want a comma, square brackets, column names to the 1, and comma, square brackets, column names to the 2. So now we can put all these bits of data in. Now this can easily be done with a method instead, so you can have it for as many, so it can just concatenate each bit and have it for as many columns as you put into the array. You don't need to do it like this, because this is a very long and boring method. This is just for the example at the moment, instead of putting that method in. But if you do want to do a method like that, it would look something similar to this. So all it does is puts the brackets, square brackets in, and then concatenates the information. But for now, we don't need that. So now, final bit, we want the values. So now we can do values, and these are the values we're going to put into the database. Oh, sorry, into those columns of the database. So we're going to first want to do the big brackets again, and then we want, instead of square brackets, we do quote marks. Here you're going to want to then have the data itself. So the same thing as before, we do value to the 0, put that into there, a comma, value to the 1, comma, value to the 2. And there we go. So that's all in the main brackets, and then you've got these quote marks surrounding the values themselves, and then we've got a comma in between each value. So this is in the order you want to input it into these. Now there's another method you can do this, and it's where you do the column name and then an equal sign and then the value, and then you do multiple lots of those. But for doing and inserting data, you don't need to do that. You can just do it in a method like this. So it first defines the columns that the data is going into, and then the values of the data that's going into those columns in order. Now you've got that, that's just the connection string. That doesn't actually do anything. Sorry, just command text. That doesn't actually do anything. That's just the command being stored. So now you want to do command, so com, dot execute, a non-query, since this is just a query. And then there we go. So what that will do is it will first open a connection, set the connection to the connection we've defined up here once you've connected, and then it will set the command text, and then it will execute that command text and put it into, you can imagine putting it into this query bit here. So that's the data that will go into it. Okay. Okay, so I've now just set up a little method here inside the main form, which creates a new instance of the class SQL server, which we've been working on, and just sets it to the name server. So then I do server.connect, and it connects. Here you would set the database name and your ID and password, but at the moment we've just got that hard coded into here. So then you want to do a string of columns and a string of values. So let's do an ID of 1 now. Full name, James, keep thinking Hughes, which is the same as the other name, kind of that, Mark. It doesn't matter what data's in there. Class ID of 3, so he's in the third class. Oh no, he's in 0, so he's in the very first class. So now we want to write data and put the columns in, and then the values. So here I've just gone back into the SQL server and made a public string for the table name as well now. So I can easily just do server.database and it gets the string of the database, server.tablename and it gets the string of the table name. Okay, so now that will write data to the table. So let's save that and let's run this and see if any errors occur, which probably will. Let's give it a second to run. So it's trying to connect at the moment then. And it failed to write data. So let's go back to the SQL server and see why it means it succeeded in connecting, but it failed to write the data to this. So if we, there we go, there it is. Just on there, I forgot to put quotations. So now if we run this again, it should establish a connection with the database. And this can take a second sometimes, and it failed to write data. Okay. Okay, so I've changed the connection string now to a local host connection because it didn't like that I wasn't using the IP and the port, and I haven't gone over that yet. So I've just changed the connection to a local host connection, and that's fixed it all. So all it does is it inserts the data into it, and I've already run it once, and it's actually inserted the data, but I'll run it again to show you. So if I refresh this, this is the latest bits, there's James Markson in here. So let's change that data now, because we've already got James Markson now. So let's think of a new name. Let's do Iris Moore. Maybe, yeah, it doesn't matter how it's spelt. And let's have this as the ID of 2, so she's under the second ID of the class ID. Let's save that and run this. Connects to the database and loads up the form here, and there's nothing on the form at the moment. And you can see, if I now go to the server and refresh this, we have Iris Moore in here, ID of 2, and a class ID of 2. And there's Iris Moore. So we've also got James Markson and Fred Hughes. So they're all in the database. In the next bit, I'm going to go over deleting values or possibly rewriting values.